Hello friends and potential friends. Well, I'm back in the kitchen because, well, apparently our winter is trying to come in down here in Central Florida. For the last couple of weeks things have cooled off quite a bit. I know September was hot and wet. October, things started cooling off a little bit. November, things started cooling off a little bit more, and we actually had a couple of cold fronts come through. Basically, they dropped our high temperatures from 90 into the 80s. And then in November, the highs dropped from the 80s into the upper 70s. In this last week or two, we've actually had highs right around 60 and lows into the 40s. I understand there was actually a freeze up northwest of me a couple hours, but it didn't make it over here. And so this is my winter. And be perfectly honest with you, the first cold snap of the year is always kind of a shock to me because I'm a Florida boy. I mean, don't pity me, I'm still sitting here in a t-shirt, though I did have a long sleeve shirt on a couple of days ago. But anyway, I tend to switch my habits around this time of year. The garden slows down. It doesn't stop, but it does slow down. So you won't see garden tours every week because things don't grow that fast. The days are shorter, the nights are cooler, things keep growing, but they grow pretty slow. And it would get kind of boring if I was to take the camera out there every week or so and walk around the garden. I'd have to kind of point out to you anything that has changed. But things have changed. I've got a few tomatoes popping up out on the front porch. Those are the garden peach tomatoes. And I've seen a few small Praxis cherry tomatoes starting to form out in the main garden. Last week I planted out more seedlings to replace some of the things that the bugs had eaten. And incidentally, with the cooler temperatures, the bugs have pretty much stopped eating my garden. So hopefully it'll be able to keep going and I'll be getting some food out of it before long. But in the meantime, one of the things that I do this time of year is start thinking about cleaning out the freezers. I've been pulling peppers out of the freezer for the last couple of weeks, putting them in the dehydrator and then turning them into pepper powders of various types. Some are just mixes and blends, others I keep separated. I need to do a batch of turmeric and a batch of ginger. They're well cured out in the shop, and I need to do something with them before the bugs find them. But for right now, I'm just trying to clean out the freezers as best I can. This is the time of year that I tend to do my canning, a lot more cooking, that sort of thing. And if I come up with any good recipes that I haven't shown you before, I'll try to remember to bring you along. But for now, I guess this is really more of a weather report than anything else. Today, our high temperature is about 65 degrees. So I could be outside working in the garden. But there's only so much you can do out there this time of year. So instead, I've started cleaning out the freezers. And one thing on my agenda, after Thanksgiving I had my turkey carcass, and I also had a bunch of chicken bones in the freezer that I've been collecting all year. So I put them in my roaster oven. That'll be cooking on low all night. And tomorrow I'll go through there and I'll pick out any meat that I can find in them bones and take all the broth and put it into jars and get it canned up for the year. And I'll be using that for probably the next year or two, actually. And when I did a video a couple of years ago showing my process for making bone broth, so I'm not going to bore you with that. But then after I get the bone broth done, I'll take the rest of those bones, and there are a lot of them, and I'll stick them in the oven for a couple of days to get them nice and crispy so I can run them through my blender and turn them into bone meal. I did a video on that too, so I'm not going to repeat that one. That way I get free bone meal for the garden. The bones don't go to waste. The broth doesn't go to waste, because I really hate wasting things. But it also accomplishes another purpose. You see, when I bought this house 30-some years ago, it had an old oil furnace in it that probably was installed back when the house was built in 1957. Well, about 20 years ago that furnace died, and I realized real fast that this is Florida. I don't really need a big heater like that. Besides which, it cost an arm and a leg to fill up that 100-gallon tank outside. So I got me a couple of little space heaters that I use from time to time, and that has served my purpose, and don't really have a need for anything else. But when I'm doing my cooking this time of year, I put that that curtain up in the doorway. That keeps the heat inside the kitchen, spreads a little bit of it through the rest of the house, and that's part of my heating system. When I start cooking, it'll be the same thing. I'll be warming up the kitchen at the same time that I'm cooking up some food. Now, I know people farther north can't rely on that sort of thing, and most of you probably think it would be unthinkable to have a house without a heater in it. But down here, we do things a little bit differently. So I'm going to cook these bones, warm up the kitchen, and enjoy life. Maybe I'll show you a glimpse when I get the bones out of there and wrap up everything that I plan on doing tomorrow. Well, that looks good. That's been cooking all night at about 200 degrees. Now it's time to strain it off and get it in jars and put it in the pressure canner. I'm going to be doing quarts, which means they'll have to process for 90 minutes. And we'll see how much I can get out of that. Well, that made for a long and satisfying day. 13 quarts of bone broth, 6 pints of turkey pickings. That's the meat I pulled off the bones. Speaking of bones, they're in the oven here drying out. One more day and they should be dry enough to crumble into bone meal. But that was a long day, but it was well worth it. And that's about it. So I'll see you next time.